Over the past few months inside of our career cohort, we've been focused on things like how to design an intentional career roadmap and what it looks like to build out a personal brand. So this month, we're going to add on to that work and we're going to focus on a personal SWOT analysis. So a SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And it was originally designed as a business tool in the 1960s to help leaders gain perspective on what organizations do well, where the challenges lie, what opportunities to pursue, and then also the potential threats in the marketplace that could have an impact on their future. A personal SWOT has the same potential to do that for you. So again, strengths and weaknesses, those are more of the internal forces and the things that you want to be thinking about in terms of what you bring to the table, what your qualities are. Opportunities and threats, those tend to be external forces. So the things that are happening out in the industry or inside of your organization that have the potential to impact your future. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to walk through each of those 4 areas, and then we're going to ask ourselves really specific questions in each of the categories that you want to be asking yourself in order to gain clarity. Okay, so what we're going to do is start with strengths. So the first question here is, what skills, abilities, knowledge, or connections do you have that others don't? Okay, I want you to think about what are some of the natural skills that you have? What are the areas that maybe you're just naturally good at? So maybe you're just naturally great at managing your time. Maybe you're naturally great at managing projects or being creative or being a storyteller or being persuasive. So maybe there's some natural skills there. On the flip side, what are some of the things that maybe you've worked really hard to master? So it could be any of those things that I've already talked about. It could be something like technology or teaching yourself a system in order to learn new things. So think about where your skills lie and how you are positioned better than others. I also want you to think about if you are potentially a career changer, and you're moving from one industry to another, what are some of the perspectives and experiences that you've had in your prior life that are going to be beneficial for you to tap into in this new career that maybe your other colleagues don't have because they haven't had the same experience as you in the past? So that's another thing for you to think about. All right, question number 2 here. So what are other people's view of your strengths? So how do other people see you and what did they think your strengths are? So these can be things that you get complimented on, when other people might come and ask for your feedback on something or ask for your opinion. Right. So if anybody's coming to you and looking for guidance, that's something that they naturally think is one of your strengths. What do your reviews look like? So if you haven't been in an organization for a long period of time, or maybe you don't do reviews as often, you might want to pull people aside and ask them their perspective and what they believe your strengths to be. So this can be a little bit challenging. We don't naturally love getting feedback. So proactively asking for feedback can be something that we need to work on. That's actually an area or skill you can develop over time and put yourself in a position and ask yourself, what is this going to help me do? If I ask for feedback right now and I get information about my strengths, what am I going to make that mean? If it ends up being about my weaknesses, what am I going to make that mean? How am I going to use that information? Whatever it is that you end up doing, if you are asking for feedback, the first thing that you should do after receiving that feedback is say thank you. They are giving you a gift. And remember, it's not easy for people to give feedback. So, not only is it sometimes hard for you to hear, but it's also difficult to give. So you want to be really gracious when asking for feedback and be sure to thank the person, no matter what it is that they're telling you. Okay, let's look at our next question here. So question number 3 is, how much experience do you have in your profession? Okay, so I want you to think about, yes, how much time have I spent in my profession? How many roles maybe have I had in my profession? How much focus have I had in my profession? If you're new to the profession, then what kind of life experience are you bringing to the table? The other thing that's really important here, especially if you're new, is what haven't I experienced? Right? If you are inside of an organization where you've got a pretty long tenure and you look at, the people that have been there for 10, 15, 20 years, part of the value of what you bring to the table is what you haven't experienced. So you haven't got the blinders on that other people inside of the organization might, because they could have that kind of, this is what we've always done mentality, or they're looking at it from one perspective. So if you come into the organization the experience that you have could be in the form of the experience that you don't have and what you bring to the table. So think about it from that perspective as well. All right, next question here is, what values do you live by that most people find too demanding? Another way for you to think about this is just in general, what values do you have? If you haven't gone through this exercise yet, in our first month, we did an awareness audit inside of our life coaching cohort. So inside of that audit, you get to look at all of the values that you want to create for yourself and how those values show up in terms of your behaviors, where they align in your life. So values are a really important thing when it comes to your career. So if, let's say, you value hard work and other people maybe value more of a lifestyle business, if you are going into a startup, you might have a different perspective of what that means, if it means, what hard work looks like. So being really clear about what your values are will allow you to align your values to the company more effectively. The other thing that it's going to do is it's going to help you avoid burnout. We talked a little bit about this in our personal brand session. When you have values misalignment between you and the organization that you're working with, it's very easy for you to become burnt out because you start living a value set that is not your own. And so making sure that you've got a really clear understanding of what you value, that ends up being a strength because you can align yourself with organizations that value the same thing. And being really clear about what you mean about each of those values is critical too, because there always can be different opinions about what a certain value means, what that looks like. Okay. So going through that and turning your values into a strength. We also want to ask yourself, which professional or academic achievements are you proudest of? Okay. So maybe think about the certifications that you've gone through or projects that you've worked on in the past that had a particularly interesting outcome, or maybe you gained some experience from those pursuits that you are proud of and that you bring to the table now. So you've grown in a certain way. Again, you can look to what have other people praised you for. So if you are one of those individuals that maybe suffers from a little bit of that imposter syndrome, you might want to look to other people and what they're praising you for, because that can be a good indicator. And then you can start to do a little bit of work on that imposter syndrome so you can start to see the value that you're actually bringing to the table. Imposter syndrome isn't typically because we don't have the skill set. It's just that we don't believe that we deserve to be where we are or that somebody's going to kind of figure us out. So that can be an interesting exercise to go through as well here. And then finally, thinking about what are some of the difficult situations that you are able to navigate successfully. I think that's a really wonderful way, again, looking to the growth that we have as a result of dealing with difficult situations. People tend to show their true self when they're in difficult spots and when they're going through challenges. So how you handle those challenges is really going to set you apart from others inside of your organization. So looking at that as being an area that you can tap into and then capitalize on is going to be helpful for you. Now, just in general, understanding our strengths is primarily important, not only because it shows us where we can quickly stand out from others, but it also gives us an area to focus on to continue to grow. What we don't want to do here is take our strengths for granted. Again, weaknesses are internally focused. So sometimes we look at our weaknesses as areas as if we want to avoid. And then in other cases, we want to look at them as things that we could improve, especially if we're trying to advance ourselves in a career where our weaknesses need to be strengths. So let's look at the questions that we can ask ourselves in order to gain some perspective on what we might want to avoid or potentially improve in the future. All right, number one. So what do other people say my weaknesses are? So I want you to think about the reviews that you get. And if you haven't yet had a review, or if you're going into a new career, new organization, look to the past where people have told you or given you feedback on some of the weaknesses that you have. Another thing that you could be thinking about here is, what do people bring to others on your team and avoid bringing to me? So that's another thing that can help you to identify potential areas of weakness, not necessarily a weakness, but it gives you at least a little bit of additional perspective where you could go and request some more feedback. All right, number two. So what are my worst work habits? Now, some of these questions, I really like to ask myself sub-questions, and that will help me to determine how to really answer the question. So think about some of the things that you end up turning in late. That tends to be a really negative habit. So if you're turning something in late, so what are the types of things that you're turning in late? When does that typically end up happening for you? What do you tend to have a negative attitude for? So again, kind of a bad habit is to have a negative attitude, but to get more specific, what are some of the things that I have a bad negative or have a bad attitude towards? Are there certain trends there? Is it certain types of work? Is it working with certain people? Is it when I receive certain types of feedback? Another question that you can ask yourself here is, what do I feel guilty about? So if you experience the emotion of guilt or shame, it tends to be because you think that you should be doing something or you shouldn't be doing something. And so what are the things that you believe you should be doing that you aren't? And what are the things that you believe you shouldn't be doing that you are? That's another way that you can find some of those bad work habits that you might have. All right, number 3. So which activities do I avoid doing? And then why do I dislike doing them? All right, so again, some sub questions that we want to ask ourselves here in order to gain better perspective are things like, what drains my energy? So we tend to avoid doing things that feel energetically draining. So what are those specific instances where I feel that my energy is being drained? What might I tell myself is hard to do? So for me, for example, I tell myself oftentimes when I'm learning new technology that this is going to be hard. And so I avoid doing it because I'm telling myself it's going to be hard. I have to sit there and actually tell myself, like, this isn't hard. You're just making it hard because you're telling yourself it is hard. And once I work through that process, then I find that I might not enjoy doing it, but it becomes much easier because I've removed some of that internal resistance. Okay, so that's another great question to ask yourself. The final one is, when do things feel confusing? Again, if we are confused, we tend to try to avoid doing stuff. We might tell ourselves something like, I don't know how to do this, and therefore it's generating that confused feeling. And oftentimes, if we haven't programmed ourselves, again, similar to that idea of what feels hard, we avoid doing. What feels confusing, we might stop ourselves from figuring out the answer. Okay, so ask yourself, when do I tend to feel confused, and how do I show up in that situation, and why do I find it confusing? All right, number 4. So, excuse me. So when do I struggle with anxiety, imposter syndrome, or procrastination? Again, in order for us to really feel into that question and understand the specific instances where that might come up, okay, I want you to think about the situations where you tend to question your ability. When do you notice fear coming up for you? When we experience fear and anxiety and imposter syndrome, sometimes it's easier for us to kind of remember periods of time where we felt a certain way. And then when we can go back to the way that we felt, we can then start to remember some of the specifics about the situation. And we can start to unfurl some of that information and really tap into, is this a weakness for me? Or is this something that I can change in the future? Or is this something that I want to avoid in the future and avoid putting myself in these situations? Okay. Last question there is, how often am I experiencing these feelings? If you are finding yourself inside of an organization or inside of a career path where you're experiencing a lot of anxiety or imposter syndrome, again, weaknesses can be a little bit of a hard word here because we tend to, when we think of weaknesses, we tend to think of the things that are negative or have negative strikes against us. But weaknesses also, weaknesses also can be more of the things that others perceive to be weaknesses or that are just mismatches. So maybe there's something that we are experiencing on a regular basis that could tell us or be an indicator that we need to switch professions and do something that's more aligned with who we are. Okay, so this can just uncover those misalignments. All right, let's look at the next page here. So number 5 is, what are the gaps in my education, my skills, or my learning? So again, as we go deeper here and ask ourselves, what could some of those gaps be? We only really know what those gaps are if we have an understanding of what we believe is going to give us a leg up, or something that maybe we currently shy away from that we want to be more engaged in. So think about the question of like, what am I going to get out of this education? What might I get out of this certification? How is this going to contribute to my future growth? If I know where it is that I want to go in the future, it's easier for me to look at the path in order to get there. And that will entail, what additional learning do I need to take on that I don't currently have today? And if I'm going to try to position myself, let's say I'm going into an interview and I don't have certain skills or certain education or certifications, how am I going to talk about that inside of that interview process so that people can see that, yes, I might not have the qualifications on paper, but either I'm willing to and know that I need to undergo that learning in order to get them, or that I have this other experience that I can slot into its place that will just, kind of take the place of that education and learning. All right, number 6, what are some of the risks that I avoid taking? So here, think about, first of all, what do you consider to be risky? What are some of the things that you feel are risky? So do you feel that giving live presentations is risky? If so, why? Do you think that doing sales calls are risky, or being more on commission is risky? So again, the reason that we want to know this in terms of weaknesses is being able to capitalize on them, or to say, here's how I plan to bridge that gap. If I really want to be in sales, but I consider commission being risky, is there a way that I can work with my organization to structure things so I have a little bit of a higher base, or I have some additional guarantees, or maybe there's a period of time that I can kind of test things out? So if you know where you're feeling that things are a little bit too risky and feel a little uncomfortable for you, again, the weaknesses element of this is a little bit confusing at times, because it's not really a weakness. It's just becoming more aware. I like thinking about this, really, it's just awareness. So being aware of what you find risky can help you to position yourself better when you're having conversations with others that they may perceive to be weaknesses. All right. Number 7, last question here. So what have I avoided getting feedback on? Now, again, we talked a little bit about feedback in our other session. When I go a little bit deeper here with feedback, I want you to think about what are some of the things that I've tried that's new for me? And have I gone and asked for feedback on my performance of doing that new thing? So maybe I've just started a new marketing campaign and I haven't yet received feedback, but I'm a little bit afraid of getting the feedback because I don't actually want to know what people think. That's part of the fear and taking risk. I might be able to put it out into the public, but if I'm not getting feedback on it, then I really don't have to see the truth about what others are perceiving my work to be like. What is something that I've been doing for a really long time, and I'm just in a flow with it, that maybe I haven't solicited feedback in a while, because again, I've been doing it for a while. And if I get negative feedback, then that might have an impact on how I feel about the work that I've been doing all along. So I might be avoiding getting some feedback on those things that I've been doing for long periods of time. And then the last piece is, what's something that maybe I haven't tried that I'm curious about trying? And what are maybe some of the pieces of feedback that I could solicit ahead of time that I haven't been soliciting? So let's say that you want to be a public speaker and you've never done public speaking before, and you go to some of your colleagues and you ask them for their feedback on whether or not they think that you would be good at doing that thing, or if you should take that chance. Now, as you heard in our personal brand session, I am all about internal feelings. Yes, I believe that external feedback is incredibly important so that we can get other people's perspective. But in this particular instance, let's say that you haven't tried something out and you're wanting to go and solicit feedback. It's something that you're super passionate about. You're a little bit afraid. If you go and you ask somebody for feedback, whether or not they think that you should try that new thing, and they say no, then you may not necessarily take the chance and try. And I think it's more important for us to take the chance and try and believe in ourselves. And yes, over time, you may find that there are certain things that you are good at and certain things that you're not great at, but really, the idea that we are just all going to be good at what we are going to be good at day one is not true, right? That's more of a fixed mindset. So if we are in a growth mindset, we're coming from this place that if we try something new and we're not great at first, through repetition and practicing, that's how we get better. So even if you're a horrible public speaker day one, doesn't necessarily mean, or if somebody says to you like, oh gosh, the way that you show up in meetings, I would suggest that you don't try public speaking. You use a lot of filler words. Like, just because that is the situation for you in the moment doesn't necessarily mean that through hard work, you don't have the opportunity to change that for yourself. Okay. So I don't always just like looking at this as weaknesses as something that you should avoid. Sometimes it's stuff that you want to be working on. Okay. Another way for you to gain more perspective, in addition to going through this exercise, is to use a psychometric tool. You can use lots of different tools that are out there, things like Kolbe or DISC or Myers-Briggs or Strengths Finders. These different tools and assessment measure different things. So some of them are affective, meaning more of the personality types that you have, your preferences. Others are more cognitive. Okay. And so cognitive, literally the only one that's out there, the only tool that's on cognitive is Kolbe, the Kolbe assessment, and that measures conation. Conation is really the act of how you take action, right? So if you are approaching a new project, a new problem, and you are trying to figure out how your instincts are going to work and what order you are going to do certain things in, that will tell you, what is your mode of action. Okay. And then the last kind of area in terms of the way that we operate and the assessments that are out there is cognition. So cognitive assessments, like the Wonderlic is a cognitive assessment. It will tell you what you are good at, what you're capable of, more of the IQ and the skills that you have. And so that one's not typically used as often. The Wonderlic isn't used very often, but other things that you can look at are things like your resume and the stuff that you've done in the past, and any certifications. All of that's more of the cognitive assessment side of the fence. Okay. So again, strengths and weaknesses, those are all internal forces. In the next two videos, we're going to be talking about external. Opportunities are external. So these are the things that are taking place in your industry or inside of your company. Opportunities can also be the people that you know. They can be what those people are doing and then how they can help you out. So these are all areas that we can take advantage of if you're specifically and strategically thinking about where it is that you want to go and then how that relates to what's happening today. So let's take a look at some of the questions that we should be asking ourselves. All right, number one, what's happening in my industry that I can take advantage of? Okay. If you aren't currently in an industry, think about the industry that you want to be in. So is there any negative or positive press that's coming out? Are there any new entrants in the industry? Or is the industry stale and in need of a refresh? Is it constricting? What's going on? And how can you position yourself properly so that you can take advantage of that? Number two, okay, who do I know that can mentor me? Think about things here like, what exactly do I want from a mentor? What am I trying to get out of that relationship? How can I position myself so I get a good cross-section of different perspectives from my mentors? Who has had success in the industry that I'm trying to tap into? Maybe who has had a failure? I think it's really just as important at looking at the successes as also as looking at the failures. You can gain a lot of perspective from what other people have gone through in the past. Who has an in? Right? You can be working with mentors that have a very specific knowledge of a certain company. Maybe they've got a lot of great relationships in that company so that they know how those people think, so they can mentor you as you are trying to go through the process of engaging with that firm. All right, number three. So what are the technologies that I can learn that will help me do my job better? Now, this is regardless of where we are in our career. We can be brand new in our career. We can also be further along in our career. We want to be thinking about how do we stay technology savvy? We don't want to find ourselves in a situation where we're not keeping pace with the technology that's out there. So always being at the forefront of what technologies can help you to do your job better or easier. Think about what might be giving you more time back in your day, or how you could leverage technology to help keep you more organized, or even things that will maybe potentially help you present your ideas or persuade people a little bit more effectively. So that could be tools like Canva. So thinking about just what are the technologies that will help you along with your career. All right, number four, what is a common problem that I can offer a solution for? Now, I like to ask myself a lot of sub questions here, similar to what we've done in other sections, where it allows us to go a little bit deeper and really gain some perspective. So think about the common problems, but then ask yourself the question, why are these things currently problems? Who are feeling these as problems? Who are they impacting? How long has this problem been an issue? What are the reasons that it hasn't been solved for yet? And then also things like, why am I the best person to solve it? So when we look at problems and we look at really great, these are really great opportunities for us to grow. I always think about problems as being frustrations, things that people just had trouble with. So anytime we can look at problems or frustrations, we have a really rich opportunity set for us to be able to capitalize on. All right, let's go to number 5 here. So what new initiatives has my company started that I can participate in? Okay. So again, if we dig a little bit deeper here, what would it look like for me to take on this initiative? Like, why would that be important to my organization? What would that show my organization of me if I were to take on that initiative? And then also think about this in terms of opportunities for yourself, where if there is an initiative inside of your organization that you could take on, what might it do for you personally? So maybe it's a volunteering opportunity and you don't have a lot of time outside of work to do some volunteering. So this is going to fulfill that portion of that desire for you. So if we look at this, in terms of taking on a certain career, taking on a job inside of an organization, you can ask them things like, what are the different opportunities that you have, different organizations that I can join inside of the firm, so that you can find out, again, if your values align, but if this is going to be a good fit that will give you more than just a base salary and some benefits. You get other opportunities that you can tap into as well that could potentially help you for the future. All right, number 6, what is my competition not doing that I could do? Here we want to look at a couple of different angles. You want to think about your internal competition, so people that are already inside of your organization, your peers, anybody else that could potentially be going for other promotions. You want to think about your external competition, people outside of your organization or people that are outside of the industry that you want to be in. How are they competing with you for space and time and energy? What about the tenured competition? So if you're inside of an organization, what about the people that have been there 20 years or 10 years, right? If you're new to the organization, what does that tenured competition have over you? What do you have over them? And then think about new competition as well. So maybe you've been in an organization for a little bit longer. What does new competition have that maybe you don't have? And then what are some of the things that they aren't doing that you could do? So think about it from both perspectives, right? We can, again, use this as an opportunity set so that when you're looking at this, you can see the areas that you want to pull the trigger and, check the box on so that you show up as the best version of yourself and as the best candidate. All right, number 7. So what type of need is there for the work that I do? This is thinking about, what is the total population? So how much opportunity is there in the space that I want to tap into for what it is that I do and the type of work that I do? What are some of the gaps that maybe I can fill? So what are the holes inside of industries that aren't being looked at right now that you could fill that gap for? So even if there isn't a known need, right? What is the need that you see, and therefore the offer that you can put out into the world that will fill that gap? Where can you create leverage for people? So how can you help people with their time, their energy, their money? So creating leverage in those areas can really help them to maximize the potential for them and for their business. So if you're coming into a position or you're trying to interview for a position, think about it in terms of what type of need is there and for me to create leverage. How many just roles in general are out there? If you're in a very specialized field or a specialized role, how many other people are you competing for those same opportunities for? I always think it's important for you to go for it. If it's something that's of passion to you and something you desire to do, don't let that be a hindrance, but having the information and knowing the numbers is also very important. It just gives you perspective. It also will help you to understand, do I want to do my own thing? So maybe instead of trying to get a job inside of an organization and you're competing for with lots of other people for one role, maybe you create the opportunity for yourself. Maybe you start your own company and you go after what it is that you want to. That way you can customize it exactly the way that you want to build it. All right. So understanding what is taking place externally right? Opportunities and threats, those are both external. So understanding what's happening outside in the market is going to help you to jump on these opportunities more quickly and to really be able to see the gaps in the industry and inside of your organization so that you can capitalize on them. Threats are anything that can pose a problem to you if gone unchecked. So what we want to do here is become aware of the potential threats and then build a plan of how to address them. That will ultimately turn our threats into opportunities. So let's take a look at the questions that we want to ask ourselves. Number one, in what way am I competing with my coworkers for positions and projects? I want you to think about here, what are the opportunities that you have and what are the opportunities that you don't have to put yourself in a position to be seen? What kind of exposure do you desire? And then ultimately, how do you want to position yourself to gain some opportunities to shine? Number two, what are the obstacles that you encounter at work? So think about, where are you feeling drained or frustrated? When are you dealing with difficult people? When might you have a mismatch in terms of expectations or in values? We talked a lot about values in other sessions and how when you find that you have those values mismatched, you can become very drained and burnt out. So this is an opportunity to look at those in terms of threats and then create a strategy to turn them into opportunities. Number three, how are outside forces threatening my role or skill set? So this is the flip side of the opportunities. You want to think about what is threatening my space in a negative way. What could cause my career path to potentially shift? Or what areas could I find myself falling behind in the future if I don't build a plan today? And then finally, how is my industry being impacted by the current economy? So are you experiencing layoffs? If you haven't so far, might you experience layoffs in the future? How can you make yourself indispensable? And how can you position yourself to leverage your current skill set in a new way if necessary? So again, creating this awareness and understanding the threats that you have will give you the opportunity to develop a plan to turn them into opportunities. Once you've answered all 4 sections, I want you to think about how you're going to use this information to position yourself more effectively as you either enter the workforce, advance in your position, or make a shift in your career.